Welcome, Slayer the Alchemist, and welcome to another episode of Dudes Talking Metal. This is where the dudes get together with you to talk all things heavy metal and hard rock. We've got the dudes in the house here, Tony, Butch, and Darren. And for today's episode, we're going to be sharing with you two bands. We each picked two bands that we didn't like them, maybe we were kind of indifferent towards them, we kind of didn't care from them, or maybe we just didn't really have any feelings towards these bands. And then we saw them live and they won us over in the live setting. So we're gonna two bands each. We're gonna go around the horn here. We'll share one band each, and then we'll go back around and share our other bands. So Tony, why don't you kick us off here with who's a band that you saw them live and they just really won you over?
My first pick is going to be the band Edguy. I remember when I was writing for zines and stuff, I received a few Edguy CDs, I think back then and in the late 90s. And I like power metal, but I'm really picky when it comes to power metal. It has to be something that just grabs me. I mean, I love stuff like Hammerfall and of course Halloween but there's a lot of those bands that's just too, I don't know, it's just like too speedy and just it
Um,
all sounds the same. It's just a digga 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 completely, and it just doesn't do anything. And I thought their name was really stupid, Ed Guy, and it's just I just was like, oh, whatever. So I go to Prague Power in Atlanta, Georgia in 2004, and they're on the bill. And I mainly went because I'm a huge Sabotage fan, and John Oliva had put a band together called, I think it was called Weapons of Mass Destruction was the name of the band that he was doing at the time. And I think that turned into his other band that he had, the Taj Mahal. But anyhow, and when you go to these festivals, there's just tons of bands playing. But Ed Guy was on the bill, and I wasn't planning to watch him. I was like just going to go out and hang out in the bar or whatever. Well, I ended up going in and checking them out, and I was just floored. I mean, these guys were amazing. It was like the band that had catchy songs, this big hooks, sing along choruses. I mean, the crowd was all into it. The lead singer, he had like the vocal prowess of someone like Michael Kiske or Bruce Dickinson, but the campiness of David Lee Roth. He just was all up there acting silly, and he had the crowd just eating out of the palm of his hand. And I was just totally blown away. The latest album they had out at that time was an album called Hellfire Club. So I immediately went over to one of the vendors and I was like, "Hey, do you got any Ed Guy stuff?" And he had the Hellfire Club, so I picked it up and was just a fan. I ended up going back and getting some of their earlier stuff, and followed them the next few years. They had a few other albums that I thought were cool. I mean, and I still check them out from time to time. The last few things they've done really hasn't done a lot for me, but I am a fan, and I have seen them a couple of times since then when they've come around on tour. So really cool band, and enjoyed them. Ed Guy.
nice. I'm like you with power metal. I'm very picky about it also, and I sort of get annoyed by like the constant double bass drumming thing. And in a live setting, I find power metal bands can be even more annoying because they do this like, hey, hey, thing constantly. And it's just like that whole like same tempo type of thing. And so yeah, I'm kind of like you. I'm very picky when it comes to power metal, and it can wear on me, really thin. It's almost has to be like they have to have some elements of traditional, like you mentioned, Hammerfall. They've sort of got this element of traditional metal to what
Mm-hmm.
they or Halloween. But when it's these bands, my wife is really into power metal, so I've been to a whole bunch of these shows. I've seen Sonata Arctica like 7 times. I've seen Stradivarius like 5 times. I've seen like all these power metal bands, like numerous Rhapsody of Fire, all these.
I'm sorry for you.
Yeah, I sat through them. I think they opened for Man of War, but I mean it wasn't bad, but it's just not my thing,
Yeah,
at all. Yeah.
yeah. Hey, you gotta, at least my wife's into metal. That's the way I look at it. I'd
Hey,
rather go
at
with her
least
to
she's
put.
not dragging you to Kanye West concerts or
Yeah,
something.
exactly so. All right, Butch, what do you got for your pick for band that blew you away, changed your mind when you saw them live?
All right. The first band that I have, I mean, I used to listen to college radio all the time, but I also listened to the local rock radio station that would play hard rock from time to time. And then I got WYSP out of Philly and WMMR. So I was, they had Metal Shop on WYSP on, what was it, Saturday nights, Darren?
Yeah, Saturday nights,
Yeah. So I got introduced
11
to a
o'clock.
whole, yeah, I get introduced to a ton of bands. In addition to, like, there were a couple of kids at school that were instrumental in me finding out about bands. And one of the bands early on that I'd heard, actually the first time I actually remember hearing them was an ad for a show they were playing somewhere. I can't remember where, and they played sound clips of the of some of the songs, and that band was Kicks. And I remember, I know part of Kicks Are for Kids was in the ad, and um, part of Sex, I think, was in the Sex is the first song I think I heard by them all the way through. I'll be honest with you, man. I did not for liking that kind of music, like hard rock, and I like AC/DC, and I like Kiss, and it was all in my wheelhouse. I just, for whatever reason, did not care for them. Um, I can't put my finger on why. Maybe too quirky for me at the time, or just something about some of the songs grated on me, the ones I heard. So I wasn't a big fan, but my buddies and I mean, what we, for fun, it was go to the mall or go to concerts. And so we went to concerts all the time. And my buddies are like, we're going to see Kicks. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go along. What else am I going to do? And they like fucking oh, blew my doors off, man. They were between the Midnight Dynamite record, and then Blow My Fuse would come out. This was like, I think I saw him in like November of '87. So they were between records. Still, like, totally, like, pretty much an underground band. I mean, Midnight Dynamite didn't get that much traction, uh, but they were like that whole idea of seeing a band live, that like it's the live show that draws you into them, is like totally embodied by them. I mean, the best, still to this day, probably one of the best, the best club band I think I've ever seen. Interestingly, for as great, I ended up being a big fan, but I didn't think they were as good in a big arena, like opening for, I think I saw them open for Rat. I'm not sure about that one. And but in a club, amazing. Like, just the energy those dudes had, and like some of the little stuff they did, like the little synchronized things and all the little tricks and stuff like that. Just little, little things like getting out the umbrella with the glitter when they did, at the beginning, Cold Shower. And I mean, they're nailing the vocal harmonies on that at the beginning. And um, just Steve Whiteman was like a Tasmanian devil on stage. I mean, and
Yeah.
um, not the most politically correct thing in the world, but the whole, some of the stage raps and stuff, especially in the middle of yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, all that stuff when you're a freaking adolescent kid, it was just a lot of fun. I mean, they were so much fun to see. And one of my favorite stories, we were packed down front, and Steve Whiteman was on a wireless mic, and he was up in the front of the stage. We were right in front of him, and he swung his mic and caught me like right full on in the side of the head with it. And I could just really put as soon as he did it, and he really put his hand right on my head and is like, "Are you all right?" And I just like, "Yeah." And I was
You got a
just one
scar
of
to
the few
prove
times
it.
I got hit by the band on stage. Him, and then I got Art Macco from Obsession caught me in the side of the head with a headstock of his guitar. And but it was they were fun. I mean, and from then on, like, I went out, like, when the set that they played, like, oddly enough, like the song I love the best, one of the ones that really drew me in that night was Walking Away, which is a ballad on this Midnight Dynamite record. I mean, the title track's great, but Walking Away was like, had this creepy keyboard part in it. And they actually played it back to back with what would be Don't Close Your Eyes, which would come out on the record later. But I mean, they were great. I went out and bought this, and I got this. right away, and then when Blow My Fuse came out, I got that, and so I've seen them, I don't know, handful of times since. Always great, always fun.
Yeah,
Great
good pick.
band.
Kicks are one of those.
I was gonna say that I've seen them. I don't know how many times, man. I mean, of course, I went to a lot of M3s, and they always headline. But I saw them a bunch of times in the clubs, and I saw them. I think they opened for Whitesnake on the Slip of the Tongue tour, and it's like you said, in the arena. I don't think it was the vibe was quite there like it is when you see them in a club. But seeing them at M3 in a big place like that, they always would steal the show. And I saw the last show that they did. I went to the very last show. The Walking Away is what they titled it. They were leaving. But I think my first Kick show was that same tour. Butch was in between the two albums. And I do remember when they played, they said, this is a new song. So it'll be on a new album. And it was Don't Close Your Eyes. And I said, this is going to be a massive hit. This is probably will break the band,
Totally cool guys too. Like we opened,
always great.
One of my old bands opened for them one time, and Steve Whiteman let us hang out with him for, I don't know, we got to hang out with him for like 15, 20 minutes, signed my bass player's harmonica, and we're talking to him about, I was talking to him about singing, and it's just cool. I mean, and then we hung out with him afterwards, and which was neat. I mean, you hear all these stories about sex and drugs and rock and roll, and here's hanging out with a bunch of dudes that are like just have bowls of fruit and stuff like in their backstage.
Yeah,
like
he's a
no
vocal coach
going on. It was cool.
Yeah, he's a vocal coach.
Yeah, he used to coach Lizzie Hale.
Lizzie Hale. Yeah.
Lizzie Hale was like when she was younger. Because where are they from? They're from like Maryland, aren't they?
Maryland. Yeah.
Baltimore.
Yeah.
Baltimore.
Hagerstown. Hagerstown.
Is it Hagerstown? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. During the time when I was listening to bands like Rat and Motley Crue and in the hair bands in the early 80s, I think Kix came out with Midnight Dynamite. Was it like 1984 or was it
85?
85? Okay. And I saw it in a record store and it looked pretty cool, and I bought it. I listened to it and it didn't really grab me. It was okay. It something about it just didn't have as much of an appeal as I thought it would. So I put it aside and I didn't really think about Kix at all after that. And they didn't really seem to like get a lot of momentum from the other bands in and around that time that were, getting really successful, which I thought was kind of strange because I thought they were a good band. They just didn't quite, maybe they weren't quite heavy enough. There was something about them that just didn't really appeal to me. But it wasn't until much, much later, like by later, I mean, like maybe 10 years ago, we saw them at the Chameleon in Lancaster, and I thought they were great. But even before that, John Gaffney and I were we opened for Kix. I think we were direct support for Kix at Steel Stacks. Do you remember that?
Wow, no.
No, really? Oh, yeah.
Actually, no. Now that you say that, yeah.
Was that Sinister Realm or Pale Divine?
Sinister Realm.
Yeah, you're right. Wow, I completely forgot about that.
That was kind of a turning point for me because I didn't really care about Kix. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Veteran hard rock heavy metal band opening up for them. That's pretty cool. But I hung out and watched them, and I was really impressed. I mean, a lot of energy. The songs kind of clicked with me in a live situation, and I liked them. I didn't buy any of their records afterwards, but sometime later, I came across Blow My Fuse in a record store, and it was like maybe $6 or something, and I had a stack under my arm. I'm like, what the hell? I'll grab this up too. I took it home and I listened to it, and I really liked it. I mean, it's like AC/DC. There's a lot of AC/DC-isms going on. A lot of hooks, just good hard rock music. And but initially they didn't really grab me. I guess it wasn't until, I mean, this probably should have been one of my bands too, now that I'm thinking of it, but didn't really grab me until after I saw them. And then I appreciated what they were doing, and my wife and we saw them like 3 times in Lancaster, and it was like kind of a tradition for us until they stopped stop playing until they retired. But yeah, every year they would come around. And whenever they come around, like, did you get Kicks tickets? Yeah, I'm going to get them tomorrow, and we go and then have a great time. Yeah, really cool band. So
Yes. I've always said, and if I had to describe them to someone, I'd say it's Cheap Trick meets AC/DC.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a good.
yeah.
All right, Darren, what's your pick? First pick.
Okay. So I referenced this before when we were talking about our 5 thrash metal picks. I mentioned seeing Death Angel in New York City at the Ritz, and I had the album prior to seeing them. When we were kids, we used to, and I don't remember how we got turned on to this record store, but there was a record store in Rochester, New York called Lakeshore Record Exchange. And one of our friends started calling, maybe they saw an ad in a magazine or something like that. So they turned us on to Lakeshore Record Exchange. And I remember calling and talking to the owner, Ron, who was really cool, really personable. And I called him, and I usually when I would call Lakeshore, I'd have a record or two in mind. And so I would call and I'd ask Ron, hey, do you have X, Y, or Z? And he'd say, yeah, I've got that. I'll put it aside for you. Is there anything else you want? And I think like, I don't know. Is there anything else that came in? Anything you could recommend? And I remember the time that I got the Death Angel record, I called and I wanted Death Scream Bloody Gore because I either saw an ad for it and Metal Forces or one of my friends had it. So I called Ron and I said, hey, do you have Death Scream Bloody Gore? And he said, yeah, I just got it in the other day. I'll put it aside for you. And I said, well, he asked me, well, is there anything else you're looking for? And then I said, well, no, not really. Is there anything you can recommend? He's like, yeah, I just got this record by this band, Death Angel, who I was familiar with because I saw them in like an issue of Aardschok or something. Aardschok was a rock magazine. I guess it was like it was a Dutch, it was a festival in Holland, if I'm not mistaken, but it became a magazine, and they were printing it in the U.S. or maybe it was available as an import. But Aardschok, I think Ron Quintana, is that how you say his name? Do you know I'm talking about? The guy from the Bay Area,
yeah.
had a section in that magazine where he would highlight bands that were up and coming in the Bay Area. So that's where I first saw Death Angel. So when this guy Ron recommended him, I was familiar with him, and I said, "Oh yeah, that sounds cool. I didn't hear anything about that. Yeah, I'll check that out." So what we used to do is he would send us these records COD, and they would come UPS, and the UPS guy would come to the house, and we'd pay for them. We'd give the money to the UPS guy, and somehow or another they would get back to the record store. I mean, I don't know when the last time was they did that. You can't order things COD anymore. But that was because sometimes we would get really excited, like, oh, what else you got? What else you got? We rack up like $100 worth of records, and like I remember I had to shake my mom down for $100 to pay the UPS guy one time because I had all these records. But anyway, so you got Dead Scream Bloody Gore and Death Angel, the Ultra Violence, and of course right away I went in for Scream Bloody Gore, loved it. Then put the Death Angel record on, and there was something. I mean, it was cool, it was thrashing, but it kind of had a little bit of a timid sound to it, mostly in the production. There was something about it that just it didn't really meet my expectations. I was a little disappointed by it. Maybe it just didn't have the rawness that I had hoped for. So fast forward however many months later, my friends and I drove to New York to go to the new music seminar, the heavy metal portion of the new music seminar, which was I think Voivod headlined, Exodus with Steve Souza, Zetro was direct support, and before that was Death Angel, Wargasm, and Jane's Addiction, oddly enough, opened the show. So we got there in around the time that Jane's Addiction was playing, and they didn't really do much for us. Then Wargasm came on, and they were really good. We didn't own any Wargasm music at the time, but I think one of us ended up getting the Wargasm album at some point. But the band that really blew me away, and in fact was probably my favorite band of the night, was Death Angel. They're super young guys, man, but they just came out and they were just on fire. Andy Gallion had to have been like 14 or 15 when he was playing drums. He was just smoking. I mean, you're talking about like the drummers of the day, like Dave Lombardo. I mean, I thought he was every bit as good. And two guitar players and everybody. And I wasn't really crazy about Mark's vocals on the record, but I really liked, he had really good stage presence, and I liked his voice a little bit more in a live situation. So man, they just blew me away. And after that, I already had the record, so I went home and I listened to the record, and the live performance coupled with what I was listening to on the record, it just fit together. And ever since then, they've been one of definitely my top 10. If our list had gone up to 10, they probably would have been around 6 or 7. And I love the stuff that they're doing now too. But yeah, the Ultraviolence by Death Angel, and Death Angel in general, was definitely a band that I had to see live first before I could really wrap my head around them. So
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice. Okay, my first pick, and this is really odd because I'm such a fan of his, especially his 70s stuff. I'm a huge, huge fan of his 70s stuff. And this could also almost be like we could do an episode on buying your first album from this band being the wrong first album. You're like a bad entry point into a particular artist. All right, so for me, it's Alice Cooper. And it wasn't like I didn't like Alice Cooper. I remember when I was young, I had an uncle that wasn't that much older than me, and he gave me a box of 8 tracks, and Billion Dollar Babies was inside the box. But if you remember with 8 tracks, a lot of times when they got to the point where the channel switched, the tape would break from the little silver. So I remember I only got to hear like about 3 minutes of Billion Dollar Babies, and then the tape, broke on me. And, of course, I had heard I'm 18 and School's Out and stuff like that. And then I got the School's Out album, and it just didn't click for me. Like the whole Looney Tunes thing and that whole like West Side Story street fight thing. I just couldn't wrap my head around it at the time. And I just sort of didn't think of them. And I was just kind of like, I don't know, it didn't excite me to want to go and explore more of his stuff. And then my wife and I went to Wacken in 2010. Wacken is, for anybody out there who doesn't know, it's like the biggest metal festival in the world, 100,000 plus people, multiple massive stages and everything. So 2010, me and my wife go, and Alice Cooper was the headline on the one night. And I was just floored. I was blown away. First of all, I didn't realize how many songs I knew by him. It was like one of those situations where, like, oh, wow, I forgot about this song. And oh, yeah, I've heard that one. And his stage show was, of course, amazing. I didn't know what to expect from his voice because he's one of those guys where his voice is like, you could picture him sounding terrible live, but he pulled it off. He sounded great live. And I was just so impressed. There was like all these songs that just stuck in my head. And as soon as we got back from Wacken, I went and bought except for the first two ones, I bought all the 70s stuff, up to, and another thing too is that I had heard the 80s stuff like Poison and stuff like that. And I didn't really care for that. And so that sort of backed me off from him. But when I saw him at Wacken, I thought the songs were great. I just loved the whole thing. And as soon as we got home from Wacken, I just went and bought all his, like, I bought like 6 or 7 Alice Cooper CDs in like one shot. I just went out and bought all this stuff like at one time, and I just absolutely loved it. And I've become I'm a huge Alice Cooper 70s, especially 70s, the Alice Cooper band, and even his solo stuff. I absolutely, when he went solo with like Welcome to My Nightmare and stuff like that, I love all that stuff now. And even School's Out, even though it's not my favorite from that era from him, it's grown on me, and I appreciate it more. But it really took me seeing him live with the show, and just one great song after another. He played for like an hour and a half, but it was just one great song after another. So yeah, he just totally won me over in the live setting. So
What year was that, John? When you saw
2010.
him at Vakken? 2010.
2010.
Okay.
We lucked
So what was
out.
that? Was that
Normally Vakken, every year it's either like rain. I don't know if I can't remember if it was last year or the year before where there was so much rain that they couldn't get trucks in and stuff like the whole thing. They shut the whole thing down for like 2 days. So every year there's always something that seems to happen there. It rains or the sun is out pounding down on people. It was perfect the entire time we were there. It was overcast. It was just amazing. And we're going to have to do an episode on maybe our favorite live experiences. And one of them, I'm not going to give it away, but one of them was not Alice Cooper, but another band that I saw at Vakken in 2010. So, okay. Tony, what do you got for your second pick?
Okay, for the second pick, I'm going to go with King's X. So when King's X came out, I just didn't get it. I mean, Headbangers Ball was playing It's Love, and it's,
Mhm.
I'm like, these guys sound like the Beatles or something. Why are they on Headbangers Ball? And then they're on Megaforce Records, and they're not a metal band. It just didn't do anything for me. And they put out in 1994, they put the Dogman album out. And I remember the local radio station was playing Black Flag, which that's a little heavier track. But I went to see Motley Crue when they had John Corabi, and it was John Corabi fronting the band instead of Vince Neil. And they were the headliner. King's X was in the middle. Typo Negative was the opening band. And I was into Typo at the time. I had discovered them through Bloody Kisses. So I was looking forward to seeing them. I was like, oh, that's cool. King's X is playing. Well, King's X, I mean, I really enjoyed that set. They put on a great show. It just seemed so much heavier live. I loved the harmony vocals. I mean, they were pulling this off as a three-piece band, and I was just blown away with how good it was. So I immediately went out and got Dogman, and they had a promo CD out. I've got it back here somewhere I could dig it out, but they had a promo CD out at that time called Building Blocks that came out, to promote the Dogman album. And a friend at the record shop actually let me borrow that and record it so I could hear some of their other stuff. And I became a fan. So I started picking up some of their stuff. And I remember I think the follow-up record was Ear Candy, and that one didn't do much for me. I was like, whatever. Then the next one was Tapehead, which was on Megaforce Records, and that was a really good record. So I just, and they're one of those bands I really like their stuff, but they're up and down. They'll put an album out I love, then they'll put something out that I don't really get. So, but I've seen them probably, 15 times or so live over the years. I mean, they always used to come through North Carolina, so I got to see them a lot. And they're one of the tightest bands you'll ever see live. Just incredible musicians and singers. I mean, it's just the vocal harmonies and stuff. They pull it all off. No backing tracks here, just amazing.
Their background vocals live are great. I saw them my wife and I went one year on the Monsters of Rock cruise, which is more like sort of the glammy hair bands. And they were on the particular year that we went. And I was just so impressed with their harmonies. I mean, 3-part harmonies, each guy singing something different. I know the guitar player sang a lead, and it was just, they were fantastic live. And they're one of those funny bands that, like we were talking about with Kicks, that sits in this kind of weird zone where like Kicks wasn't as heavy as like Rat and Dawkins. They were more towards the bluesy AC/DC side. And King's X is kind of like that too. They're heavy, but they're not as heavy as, Metallica or Iron Maiden or something like that. But there's heavier than the Beatles or something, where again they have the vocal harmonies like the Beatles. So they sit in this weird kind of like hard rock, but kind of metal elements to what they do. So,
well, they, going back to those first couple of records, I mean, they were like pretty much pre-grunge. I mean, they were down tuning.
Yeah, true. Yeah, they did have that kind of sound to them. So cool. All right,
first
Butch.
album came out on their first came out on Megaforce. Actually, it was I forget what the name of it was.
Out of the Silent Planet.
Yeah, Out of the Silent Planet. And then the second one, but I got that as a promo, and I thought, well, okay, it's on Megaforce Records, so it has to be heavy, it has to be kind of thrashy, or order of the day for bands that were
Exactly.
signed to Megaforce Records, which at the time was like Overkill and uh Anthrax. And I remember I got the King's X with the Ace Frehley. There's a package. Ace Frehley, the Ace Frehley album was Trouble Walking, and I like that. So I kind of figured that the King's X would be something a little bit more similar to, maybe a hard rock kind of a thing. And it just didn't really do it for me. But the next album I really like, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good album, and that really grew on me. But King's X had this sound, and it's another thing that I think that kind of alienates them in a good way, depending on how you look at it, from all the other bands. They have like this guitar sound that there's a sound of their music where it's instantly recognizable. I mean, if you play like 30 seconds of a King's X song, and it's like, whether it's the guitar tone, even before the vocals start, maybe the way that the guitar and the bass blend, it's very distinctive. They have a lot of character, and it's one of those things that I think you either like it or you don't. And I have a bunch of their records, because I really tried to find out what all the fuss was about. I had some friends that were like going to see King's X and really excited about it, and they like King's X, and oh well, what's your favorite album? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I only have like 3 of them, but I guess it would probably be Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. And they start rattling, oh, you got to hear, oh, you don't have this one, you got to get this one, or whatever. So then I started, okay, well, I'll check them out. I'll do a deeper dive. And really, I mean, it the more albums I got, it felt like I got even more lost. I'm like, well, I don't really know how to classify. I mean, I kind of have to pigeonhole things, and to some degree, I guess, to keep it organized in my mind. And I just really couldn't figure out what kind of music. I mean, they're heavy, they're rock, they're hard rock, but very, very distinctive. And I guess I'm still kind of in the process of warming up to King's X. I've never seen them live, so maybe and I think they're done now, aren't they? They're not playing
I
live
think they're
anymore,
still.
haven't they?
I think
I
they're
don't
still
know. I thought
active.
Still playing
they're
live?
still touring. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't think they
wow,
tour a
okay.
lot, but I think they
They've
still.
maybe cut back. Those guys are pretty old. I mean, Doug
Yeah,
Pennick's
the
in his
bass player
70s.
Doug is like,
Yeah.
he's like in his 70s, like 78 or something. I mean, the guy is like in amazing shape. He's
Yeah,
like,
he looks like he's 40.
yeah, exactly. He's like only eats like organic food. He's on like some really strict. I ran into him at the salad bar on the boat, and I asked him like, dude, what's your secret? And he was telling me about how when I get back from the cruise, I'm gonna have to do a cleanse because I haven't been able to my normal diet and stuff like that. So yeah.
I
Sworn
remember
that they
seeing them.
retired. I thought they threw in the towel recently. But Doug Pinnick, did you hear that thing that he did with Bruce Franklin? Super Shine?
Yeah, Super
Yeah.
Shine. Yeah,
That's
that
pretty
was pretty
cool.
cool. Yeah, that was a while back.
Oh,
One of my favorite King's X memories, I saw them, they opened for Dio once, and I think it was their first date on the tour, maybe, or something. But uh, I remember Dio's on stage and he's playing Don't Talk to Strangers, and I could hear somebody singing like just at the top of their lungs behind me. And I turn, and Doug Pennick's standing right behind me, and he's
Nice.
singing right. And I was just like, wow, Yeah.
They're one of those bands that there's people, I know one or two people that are just like obsessed with King's X. They're like way, way, way into them. But I remember Eddie Trunk saying once, because I think he worked for Megaforce right around that time. He might have even have been involved with signing King's X. And he said something about how if they could have counted the promo copies that they gave away for King's X, he goes, all the musicians loved them. Every musician and band member wanted a copy, a promo copy of their new record. He goes, but it just never clicked like with the general public. He was like, they were a really well-respected band amongst all the other bands, but they just never, I don't know, took that next step. Even though they did kind of have a hit. What was their big hit? Sort
It's
of big
Love
hit.
was
They had a
pretty
video
big.
Shot
for
of Love, maybe, or Goldilocks.
is
They're
it Love?
almost
Out of
may have
My
been
Mind. It was
Love.
kind
Love,
of
I
like
think,
a
was
fast
Out of
one.
My Head.
Over My
Oh,
Head.
Out of My
Out of My
Head.
Head.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Over My Head. Yeah.
Oh, It's
They
Love. It's Love
they,
was a song that a video for the
yeah.
song It's Love.
Yeah, that was
They
dope.
I've always they're kind of like a jam band in a way. They have these people just come. I mean, I've seen them live so many times. The place will be packed, but they just don't sell a lot of records.
Yeah.
People come to see them, but they don't buy the records. Nowadays, people probably just stream it. But back in the day, they just weren't selling a lot of records, but their shows would be packed when they would headline.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the jam bands don't sell a lot of records either, but people go to see them.
They just had bad timing, man. I mean, although I honestly maybe I'm wrong about timing part of it, just in terms of I don't know if the timing ever would have been right for them, is what I'm saying. But especially in the '80s, like they were a band that was like just way too quirky for people. Either wanted to just like freaking thrash and be heavy, or they wanted, the TNA, the cock rock and all that. There was, some of these bands were a little bit quirkier, fell between the cracks. Bands like King's X, bands like Zebra, Kicks. I think to an extent, like those first few records are real, like kind of like just different from what other bands were doing. So, but anyway, I saw that tour too, that Motley Crue tour, and I kind of like King's X, but they like destroyed that night. Them and Typo Negative were amazing, and they like destroyed Motley Crue on that tour. I was expecting it to be cool. I was looking forward to hearing Karabi on the old stuff, and like I was so disappointed with them. But King's X and Typo, that show was sick. I forever cemented as at least like having total respect for King's X after they were just so great live. That unbelievable.
Nice.
It's not my next one though.
All right, Butch, what is your next one?
Similar to Kicks, really. This is another airport music hall band. My buddies were into this band, another band that they used to play on college radio all the time, and it never really got clicked with me for whatever reason, and that's the TT Quick. Like, and if you knew me, I love especially this record, like for years now. Like, but again, when I first heard some of these songs, I think part of it was I had a friend that, how it is sometimes when you're real good friends with someone, it gets to the point where at first you're like sharing music and you're all into like the same stuff, and then it gets to the point where like then you're starting to like, there comes a point where they're listening to something and it's so much and it starts to grate on your nerves, and you'll put something in that they're like sick of hearing. And he would play Come Beat the Band off this record all the time, and I'm just like, dude, give me a break with this album already in the car. Like I've had enough of this. But I don't know what it was. I didn't like hate them or anything. I was just like, didn't really feel it. I wasn't not had no initiative to go out and buy it. I kind of liked the song Hell to Pay, and the title track was cool, but I thought Child of Sin was boring as hell at the time. But we went to see these guys live. Again, it was another one. Like, dude, we just come to the show with us. What else are you gonna do? I'm like, fine. So I go, and they were amazing. Just again with the energy of these guys, and I'm it's kind of a bummer. Like when I saw him, Eric Farrow had something going on, was sick or whatever, so they had a fill-in drummer. So I didn't get to see him with Eric on drums. But I don't know. I mean, they were so good live. Like, and like Walt Fortune playing his ass off on bass. Like they're just like they were like way better musicians than I had pictured. I'm the songs, you could tell in the songs they could play, but like seeing them live, like they were just like ripped. And Mark Tornillo is an amazing frontman, just like killer. Like had the crowd like in the palm of his hand the whole night. All the songs off this record that I was iffy on before, like I came out of this, I was like, I gotta get that record. It just like something flipped with me. And in addition to like playing this, and then I hadn't heard too much from the EP at that point. But they played when I saw them, they played Metal Man, which I fell in love with immediately as soon as they played it. I thought that song was great. And they played some AC/DC covers too. They did this portion of their set where I forget what they called it, the Power Age Hour or so. Anyway, he was talking about how in their club, at one point they used to like do like this set of covers, and they played Riff Raff by AC/DC, which, believe it or not, like I had not heard yet. So the first time I'm hearing Riff Raff is when TT Quick is playing it, and I was like, Jesus Christ. So that was another thing I like started, like I had to go out and get some of those, the records I didn't have by AC/DC with some of those songs on them. So I don't, again, like I just they're just one of those bands. I think the seeing them live and just the way they connected with the crowd and watching them play, and it just unlocked like an appreciation for what they did. From then, like I went out and I bought Medal of Honor on cassette right away, but wore it out. We used to, a lot of it. There was a group of us that were into them, and I remember we were like, "What the hell happened to them?" They kind of like disappeared after it. It was years until Sloppy Seconds came out. That was, they got dropped. They'd gotten dropped by that time. It was, and we all thought this record was so good. I mean, you could kind of tell they didn't fit again. Like they kind of like fell. They were heavy. They were certainly heavier than the hair metal bands, but they weren't as heavy as the thrash bands. And they were, they wore jeans and t-shirts and stuff on stage. They had no image to speak of, but they would like destroy you live. They were incredible, and I'm bummed that I only ever got to see them that one time. And they used to come to town fairly often, but one of those bands that when they'd come, like for whatever reason, I had stuff going on. But TT Quick is great. Still one of my favorite records to this day, these two. And I like the other stuff they did too, but these two especially.
Because they were from New Jersey, right?
Yeah, I mean, so they were all, Allentown was a hop, skip, and a jump for them. There was a band called Wash that opened up for them that were incredible too. They became like,
I've heard of Wash.
They became one of my favorite bands. That, like, and I got
their
to
bass
see them.
player. Their bass player lives down here now,
John
in
Roebuck.
North Carolina. Yeah.
JJ Belly, their singer, just died a couple months ago.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, TT Quick, I always dug it. Since the first time I heard it, I got Medal of Honor, and I never got to see them live. But I remember hearing you mentioned Child of Sin. It's like, wow, he sounds like Udo. And then of course he would go on to do that. I remember ordering Sloppy Seconds out of the back of out of Wild Rags mail order, and I think I got the live album maybe from them as well, maybe Metal Disc, when you had to do all the mail order stuff back in the day.
Nice.
All right,
Darren, what's your
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I ended up really loving Child of Sin, which is one of the songs I liked the least at the time. And it's funny, it's deceptively short. Like it's way shorter than it feels like this bigger kind of longer kind of song, like that you could picture, like you could see where they could stretch it, but like they got a lot into that, just like that little bit, like it's like under 3 minutes long. And I
had some friends that went to Mark Tornello's 60th birthday party recently, and they had a TT Quick reunion at his party.
Nice.
The guitar player, what was his name? David DePietro. Yeah. He was in Nuclear Assault for a little while, but he was like Zach Wiles' guitar teacher. Wow. So the guy's like super, super good guitarist.
Yeah, he rips.
Nice. All right, Darren, what do you got for your last pick?
So in 1988, I think it was either 87 or 88, I got a promo record. Most of the promos I was getting were either cassette, and I would get a few CDs, but most of them were cassette. But this one particular occasion, I got a vinyl record, corner cutout, and it was by this group called Obituary, and the cover art was so cheesy. It was like one of the worst album covers I'd ever seen. Flipped it over, looked at song titles, and without even hearing them, I got the impression that they were trying to sound like Death. I put it on, listened to it one time, and sure enough, they sounded similar to Death. And at this point, I hadn't really gotten into death metal. There weren't that many death metal bands. That was to come in the next couple of years. But it didn't really, it just seemed like they were kind of going through the motions. Like maybe my first impression was that they were kind of ripping off Death and a little bit of Celtic Frost. but it just didn't really hit with me. So I put it aside. Didn't really think about him again. Not too long after that, though, I started getting into death metal, which was a natural progression from where I was prior to that, which is into thrash and crossover, hardcore, stuff like that. So my next rung up the ladder was death metal, and the things that were coming out at the time: Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness, Autopsy, Severed Survival, Entombed, Left Hand Path, were the big ones. Started going to shows, seeing bands like Immolation, Incantation, well, Mortician, Incantation, some of the underground stuff, and really getting into death metal a lot. Sometime later, I got a couple promos again. One was for Sadis, who I was familiar with from around the later part of the 80s, 86, 87, the Illusions, Chemical, I forget what the name of it was one name for the cassette and one name for the album. I had Illusions, and it was really hyper fast, technical thrash death, and I liked it. I wasn't crazy about them. Some people were, and I would hear a lot about. They had a big reputation in California, and I heard a lot about them, but they didn't really grab me as much as I had hoped they would. But the promo package that I got was Sadis, Swallowed in Black, and Obituary, Cause of Death. Well, right away, I took the Obituary out. I put that aside. That was like either thrown across the room or left in the envelope and just sort of on top of my dresser or something. And I listened to the Sadis a lot. I dug that. Didn't really crack open um, the Obituary. The album cover was cooler. Had some art by, I think, Michael Whelan. Um, so I would at least give them that much credit. But they just kind of turned me off when I first heard them, to the point where I just wasn't really interested in what they were doing. And there's a group of bands, and they were one of them that my friends and I was friends with Anne Marie Bowman, who I met in Philadelphia when I was going to school there. She and I ended up doing our. She ended up joining me in the fanzine that I was doing, and she basically helped take it to the next level. She actually parlayed that into writing for Metal Maniacs for a number of years. And but when I met her in Philly, she was promoting shows at a place in Pennsauken, New Jersey called G Willikers, and she was managing a couple bands, and one of them was a band called Gorephobia from Philadelphia. And through them, she, memory serves, got connected with a lot of underground death metal bands. So we were really getting into a lot of death metal, going to these shows as often as she would have them. Tons of tons of bands. She ended up getting some national acts. But this package tour, well, to back up a little bit, there was a group of bands that we considered cheesy, and they weren't cool. And one of them was, of course, Obituary. The other was Deicide, and the third one, and there was other ones, but the big three: the Cannibal Corpse, Obituary, Deicide. Those bands were pretty cheesy. Eventually, I think everybody kind of came around to accepting them, but initially they were sort of like, they were kind of like pariah. Something about them that just wasn't cool. They smelled funky, and Obituary was part of that. But being into the scene and going to all these shows and getting really into death metal, we ended up driving to New York City, Brooklyn, Lemoore, to see this package tour, which was Sadis. Sepultura was headlining. They were on tour for Arise. Sadis was on tour for the promo that I just got, Swallowed in Black, and Obituary for their new album called The End. I know, Cause of Death. Is that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Second album. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so we went to the show, and I'm really excited to see Sadis. I was really into Sepultura at the time. I like Beneath the Remains. I like Schizophrenia. I was really impressed with Arise, so I was looking forward to seeing them. I believe Sadis came out first, and I remember I was standing back by the mixing board, um, well, anyway, so Sadist played first, and they were just ripping, just super fast, heavy. It was amazing. It was just like a blur of energy. And then next was Obituary, and they came out and they started to play, and I was standing back by the mixing board, and I was wearing my Autopsy shirt, and two guys next to me were Steve DiGiorgio and Darren Travis from Sadist, and he looked over and he's like, "Cool shirt. Those guys are friends of ours." And I didn't recognize Steve DiGiorgio right away, or remember that he played on Severed Survival by Autopsy. So I was like, "Oh, cool, yeah, I love Autopsy." And we're talking a little bit before Obituary came on. When Obituary took the stage, this guys took off. I moved up a little bit closer to the front. About a minute or two into it, they just like everything just changed. I mean, the riffs were. And it was one of the songs that was on the new album that I hadn't heard yet. But man, it was just really really cool. The energy both on stage and in the crowd, it just fed into one another, and it was just a great show, song after song, really heavy. There's a lot of, like I said, there was a lot of Celtic frost, but in a live situation, it just came together much better. I could see them. They're obviously really into what they were doing. The songs had a little bit of complexity. They had James Murphy on guitar, who had previously been in Death, recorded Spiritual Healing, and so now he was kind of bouncing around, or he would bounce from Obituary to, I don't know, I think he went to Cancer, the UK death band, and then he was Disincarnate. I mean, he was all over the place, and then eventually ended up in Testament and whatnot. But at this point, he was playing guitar and Obituary, and man, it just really made an impression. And I just thought they were great. I got into them, went home next day, dug out that cassette, started listening to it, really got into it, liked it, and I've been into them ever since. They're probably one of my favorite, most visited death metal bands. I will say that. I don't know if they were one of my favorites, but I do listen to them a lot. They're a lot of fun. They seem like pretty cool guys. They don't take what they do too seriously, but seriously enough to do it well, and to kick ass. And they've had it going now for a long time, consistently. Couple member changes here and there, but the two brothers, Donald and John Tardy, have kept it together. And I saw them a couple years ago at the Maryland Death Fest, and they were great. But it took seeing them that one time to like change my mind. But yeah, that did it for me. Prior to that, not so much into them, but live they just brought it. They were awesome.
Yeah, they are
Good
one of those
band.
bands, I could never get past the vocals when I first heard them. It sort of turned me off, the vocals.
Yeah.
And when I first moved to Tampa was right when they were kind of coming out of retirement, and were starting to become active again. And they played this show at this really small place. I mean, 150 people in this place could fit at the most. The stage was just this little wooden thing that they barely all fit on. I remember they used like half size amplifiers. They didn't use like full stacks or anything. I mean, the back of the room was, you could it was a small room. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to just sound horrible. It's a really small room. These guys are going to play way too loud. It's just going to sound terrible. And they got up and I was just floored. I was like, whoa, like, and the guitar sound especially was like, they have this real, like, it's kind of like one sound and it's just real powerful. The guitars were just like spot on. And
Yeah, it's like that tone, the guitar tone, so
yeah, it has
cool.
a they
Grind,
kind of
that
have their own,
grind.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has like this grind to it, and it's clear, but it's just like super powerful. And they were just super tight. And again, at the time I can't remember what the name of that record was that they put out when they kind of had just started coming back. Like I think they had just released that or something like that. And they
Back
were,
from the Dead.
yeah, or something. I don't remember. And now, of course, like they start and end every tour in Tampa. They just play random shows in Tampa. They're like they're like, it seems like every time you turn around, like Sepultura is playing in Tampa, and Obituary is opening up for them. Amon Amarth was here a couple months ago, and Obituary was opening up for them. It's like, they're just like constantly on the road touring now. So
And they're
yeah,
like
cool.
down to earth guys, just totally down to earth. I mean, like,
Yeah, like
I don't know,
Terry.
they're kind of just rednecky guys,
Yeah,
They like to
exactly.
hunt and fish, and
Yeah, they
yeah,
roll up in
really,
their pickup trucks and
yeah,
they just stand around in the crowd before it's time for them to go on stage, and then they just sort of walk up on stage. It kind of reminds me, you wouldn't think this, but Deicide, the drummer, what's his name? Steve Asham?
Steve
Yeah.
Ashheim.
Yeah, they're I saw them like, I don't know, it was right before the pandemic. It was 2 albums ago when they had God, not God Hates Us All. I forget what the name of the record was. In the Mind of Evil or something like that, I think was the name of the record. And he's kind of the same way. Like he's just kind of standing in the crowd. The band went on before them. He carries his drums out on stage. He's setting them up. The show's over. He doesn't even leave the stage. He's just up there turning his cymbals, and people are, hey man, hey, and he come over, take a picture. He's putting his cymbals in the bag. The guys are just coming out and just packing
that's
up their
cool.
their stuff, and they're leaving. So yeah, okay. So for me, this band, I ignored this band and didn't like this band because they were because of the way they looked, to be to be honest with you, and that was Cinderella. And I hated their look. I loved the first wave of hair, like Dawkins, Rat, Motley, all that early stuff I liked. But by the time 86, 87 rolled around, I was kind of like burnt out on that stuff and wasn't paying attention to it. But then I saw Tom Kiefer's band. So maybe this is cheating a little bit, but I saw Tom Kiefer's solo band. And I don't know if you've ever heard any of his solo stuff or if you've ever seen him live. And I'm trying to remember where I saw him. I'm pretty sure it was the M3 Festival. It might have been like the first or second year of the M3 Festival. And I'm expecting like this is going to be horrible. Cinderella is this corny band. And now all you have is the singer. The dude's voice, I expected his voice to sound terrible live because he's kind of a screamer. And I'm watching them set up, and I'm like, what is going on? There's like a Hammond organ on stage. There's, a couple guitar players. There's like some girl singers. There's like all these players on stage. I'm like, what is this? And he gets up and he starts playing like it sounded like the Rolling Stones, like circa, mid 70s era Rolling Stones. It was this great, like bluesy 70s thing. He did a whole bunch of Cinderella songs. And in this context, I was like, oh, wow, like these songs are like blues, heavy blues rock, Aerosmith, Rolling Stones type of tunes. So I went back to the Cinderella records. I think I actually had like one or two of their vinyl records that I just never listened to. I like bought it for like $3 just because it was there and I never listened to it. And I went back and listened and I was like, wow, this is some really cool stuff. And it was great songwriting. And I always say, like, they're one of these bands that fell victim to the whole look thing. Like, if they had just come out in jeans and t-shirts, the production on some of those records is a little bit slick. If the production was a little bit more earthy, if those guys didn't have that name, if they were called something else and they had more of a down to earth look, in my opinion, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't have, they were really successful. So who knows? Maybe they wouldn't have been more successful, but maybe they would have survived when the whole hair metal ship went down. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten dragged down as badly with it. They could have been like Tesla. Tesla is one of those
Hmm.
bands that
Oh
sort
yeah,
of
totally.
existed in the glam hair world, even though they really didn't have anything to do with that. And they were able to sort of survive it to a certain degree because they had this sort of Zeppelin-y, bluesy. They just dressed in jeans and stuff like that. So yeah, seeing Tom Kiefer and his band, and I got to see them again when we were on that Monsters of Rock cruise, and I was all ready for it. At that point, I had his solo album and everything. So by the time I saw them on the cruise, then for the second time, I was ready for it, and I was just really, really into it. So
Those
yeah,
dudes
Yeah,
were
they're one of those
fun.
bands. That first album cover, yeah,
it's
it's
bad.
so it just not. that is so false advertising to the music that's on it. I mean, you expect Poison and you put it on, you get Aerosmith.
Yeah, exactly.
A little AC/DC. Yeah, that's a great album. That's one of the albums I think from that era that I revisit the most. It's really solid. The production's good. They're actually kind of a local band because they're from Springfield, PA, which is only about a half hour away from where I live. But they would, and Butch, you were talking about Metal Shop. They were on. Do you remember Metal Shop had that thing that segment where they would be smash or trash?
Yeah.
It was for the local bands. Somebody submitted Cinderella for the smash or trash, and this is about 1984, I think. And they were up against another local band called Tease, and
I love them.
they played Tease and Cinderella got smashed, or no, it got trashed, and Tease got trashed, which meant that they went on to the next level, and they were competing against another local band. But Cinderella was out of it, and which ironic. And I like Tease. I know you did. I know you did too, Butch. I mean, I think
is that the band that became
like a Tease
Jailhouse Tease?
No, Rough House.
Yeah, Rough House.
Rough House.
Rough House.
Yeah. That first Tease record's good.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But what was funny, and I guess sort of ironic, was that Tease, they didn't go anywhere as Tease, and even when they kind of got a little bit of success as Rough House, it wasn't until like '89 or something. It was like, yeah, I got that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one I have.
It wasn't until the hair.
Same album.
Yeah, that was on Green World. Yeah, that's actually I think the same album, but I think it's like
different cover,
remastered, or
different cover.
Remixed,
there's
different
an extra
cover.
track.
Yeah. But Tease didn't go anywhere really, and even though Cinderella got trashed on Metal Shop, they obviously got really successful in around '85, and I bought the album when it came out. But I remember even before that, like in the early, like '83, '84, I remember seeing them advertising shows in the East Coast Rocker, which was a local publication for live music and stuff like that. And I saw that they're look. I was into that shit at the time. I mean, I liked Twisted Sister and Motley Crue, and they looked like Twisted Sister and Motley Crue. So, but unfortunately, they were only playing like 21 and older clubs, and I was too young to see them. Then that was probably about '83 or '84, and then by '85 and 80, I think that album came out in '86. It was Night Songs.
Yeah,
that's a solid album. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, but you're right. I mean, it doesn't. The music, it doesn't. I mean, the look is deceiving because it's really, the music is more AC/DC, Aerosmith, hard rock, well produced. Songs are well written, well played. Yeah, it's good stuff. But you would think like they're like another Poison band, or they're like, like kind of a anonymous hair metal band or hair band or whatever. But they're actually better than that. So it's unfortunate that they got lumped into the, I don't know, that
for sure.
C, B, D grade.
It's good that Tom has been able to carry on and do what he's doing, because he's brought it into a different, like almost, he's pulling a different audience, as well as the people our age and stuff. And he's got some people that probably just never got into it before, and they're going, wow, this is pretty good stuff, and he's, he stayed kind of out of the spotlight for years before he came back, and
he had some vocal damage.
They did some reunion, they did some of these tours where they'd have the original Cinderella band and stuff, but I've actually got a unreleased demo that he put out. It's really Americana. It almost sounds like some Tom Petty meets the Eagles or something.
He has a little bit of that element with his new band, this sort of, acoustic guitar, maybe somebody pulls out a mandolin for one song or something like that. And, you kind of get the impression that maybe that's, if they had gone that route, early on, the band.
Well, they did really. I mean, the second album was very bluesy, and then the third album would get that song "Shelter Me" or whatever that had like mandolin and all in it.
That record, that Heartbreak Station's like the Stones.
Yeah,
totally exactly. Stones. Yeah, but
they're just unfortunately you know, when the grunge bomb dropped, they were on the wrong side of the whole thing because of their look and everything. And it's one of those
I don't know
first
that they.
impressions, you know, they sort of started toning that down by the time you
Oh
got to
yeah.
Heartbreak Station, but it's again, it's a first impressions thing. Like, you know, once you have that look and everything, you just sort of get pegged into that whole
And
thing, and it's
the
real hard to
name,
shake it. Yeah, and the
yeah,
name too,
Cinderella is a very, you know, it's more, it's, you think about, you know, more about
poison, and yeah.
Disney and stuff like that as well, you know.
I saw this interview with a record exec guy, and he was talking about how a lot of these glam bands just got blown off the map, you know, once the 90s hit, and everybody involved in those bands, nobody wanted to have anything to do with them. If you were a Tom Werman, couldn't produce anybody because nobody wanted to have any connection to those old bands. And this record guy was talking about how he was working at a label, and there were a lot of young kids, A&R, you know, 20 something year old A&R kids. And he goes, Tom Kiefer had given him this new demo that he was thinking of releasing as Cinderella or as Tom Kiefer or something. So he goes, I've got it playing in my office. And he goes, I sort of crank it up. And he goes, all the A&R, everybody in the whole building is like, comes into my office. And they're like, what is this? We have to sign this. This is incredible. And the guy goes, yeah, it's Tom Kiefer. And somebody goes, the guy from Cinderella? And he goes, yeah, yeah, the singer from Cinderella. And everybody went, oh, and they quiet, they just, you know, they're shuffled out of the room like, you know, we're
Man,
not touching that with 100-foot pole. You know, it's kind of like the Winger thing. You know, Winger is like Kip Winger is like this. The guy's writing operas and musicals and orchestral scores. He's like this musical genius, but everybody knows him as, you know, the guy that Metallica was throwing darts at in their video, and they got lumped into that whole thing too. Rod Morgenstein and all those, they were amazing, amazing musicians, but the look was goofy and the clothes and everything, and they just sort of dragged them down.
they were so entertaining live,
Winger.
though. Like I saw them in '87 at the Allentown Fairgrounds. Ace Frehley opened for them. Um, it was their first time their headlining tour, like after becoming big. And man, I mean, I know a lot of people make fun of the stuff bands used to do. Like I remember seeing a video recently of the guys from Accept working on their moves with I'm spacing on his name. The cat plays in Whitesnake, was filling in for a while. Joel
Hoekstrom,
Hoekstra.
yeah.
Joe Holscher, yeah.
Yeah, and people are like making fun of the moves and stuff, but I'm like, man, some of that stuff, like, if it's done right, like, and that's the point people miss, like with them making fun of that video, is if you don't practice it, it looks stupid. If you get it all together, I mean, that was like a machine. Like the way they would swing the
Yeah.
guitars and stuff looks freaking awesome. And Cinderella had those little moves that you might think are cheesy, but are like this flipping the freaking swinging the
Flipping the
guitar
guitars.
back and then throwing Tom's guitars to him from the side
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
stage. Like, and I don't know. I thought they were fun. That I saw them on the Long Cold Winter tour, and they did this thing. When they were doing "Don't Know Where You Got Till It's Gone," he came down from the rafters playing the grand piano,
Baby Grand.
the
Yeah.
white piano, and they
Was
brought it
that
down.
was that with ACDC? I
I
saw him
saw
open for
at
ACDC.
Stabler Arena with I forget who opened for him on that tour now.
Yeah. They were opening for ACDC when I saw them with that. Hey, I've got a funny story about this flipping the guitars around. So probably around like 2004, 2005, uh Eric Brittingham, the bass player from Cinderella, and Jeff LaBar, the guitarist, had a band called Naked Beggars and it was Eric Brittingham's wife singing. And they were pretty cool, just kind of a poppy hard rock band. And they played this little club in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we went out to see them. And I remember I was talking to Jeff before the show because I was telling him that I saw him open for David Lee Roth. And he said that was his first. I saw the first date of the Eat 'em and Smile tour. And he was saying, yeah, that's awesome. You were there. He said, that's the first time I ever played in an arena was that, because that was the first date of the tour. And anyhow, so they go up and they start playing. And somewhere like I had went to the restroom and I heard the music stop. And
Uh-oh.
I came out and there was the chandelier hanging over the stage, above the stage. Jeff had went to do his patented spinning the guitar move, and he just nailed it. and it burst into a million pieces, and there were people standing there. They had glass all in their drinks.
Oh,
People were
man.
just standing there.
Oh.
I mean, it was a good, decent crowd there, and it was just glass everywhere, and they had to stop and clean up. And we ended up leaving, and I walked up to him before we left, and I patted him on the back, said, "Hey man, good to see you again. And hey man, everybody has a Spinal Tap moment." He's like, "That's what this is. This is a Spinal Tap moment." He was just like couldn't believe it had happened.
Hey man, those moves were important back then in the 80s. So
Yeah.
all right,
Malmsteen
well,
started that, didn't he? Didn't Ingve started that back in like 84,
Maybe.
85? He was
Yeah.
one like
yeah,
the guitar up.
maybe.
I've seen a lot of
Everybody, like, thought
guys
it was
lose
cool.
their guitars trying to do that.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
dangerous
Scrap
stuff.
blocks.
I think there's a
Scrap
YouTube
blocks.
compilation of it. You know,
I had a
Dangerous
band in
stuff.
high school. My bass player used to he would do it once in a while, like throw his bass around the back of him.
Funny stuff. All right. Well, how about we'll do a real quick go around. If you have any honorable mentions, give us your honorable mentions. So Tony, got any didn't make your
quickly
list?
I could.
Could have.
One that I almost made the list was Rollins band, Henry Rollins. I never got into Rollins. I was never into Black Flag. I think it was around like 2000. I went to see him for the first time, and he had a new band. He had put out this new record. It was what's the name of it? It's Get Some Go Again, and it might have been a little before. It might have been 1999. It was before this album had come out, and they played live, and I went to see him. And he had a new band. He hired this band called Mother Superior, three-piece, just bass, drums, guitar band. They were his backing band. They'd come out and they'd open up for themselves. They'd come out as Mother Superior, do a set, and they had original music, and they sold their own CDs. And then basically they were his backing band. And they were so much more rocking, like just straight ahead hard rock. I mean, like MC5, type stuff compared to the earlier Rollins stuff that I had heard and thought, okay, it's okay, but wasn't that big into it. And they even did a cover that night of Are You Ready from Thin Lizzy. And when the show was over, I spoke to Henry out front of the club, and he said that Scott told me that Scott Gorham had played on the album, had done a guest appearance on the upcoming album that was coming out for, and but so that made me a fan. And I actually went back out and got like Come In and Burn and Wait and some of the earlier stuff, and gave that another chance, because I had just kind of all I'd heard was what was on MTV, like I'm a Liar and stuff like that, So yeah, and but it still Get Some Go Again, and the last record that he did as a group, Nice, with that lineup. They're two of my favorites. Love them.
Yeah.
Just good straight ahead hard rock, Yeah.
Cool.
He's always had great musicians. Even the band, End of Silence band, phenomenal band. Sim Kane, the drummer, was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And their music at that time was very Sabbathy. Black Flag started like around My War and Slip It In, Loose Nut, started getting in like some sludgy Sabbathy type stuff. But by the time he went to his solo thing, especially when he did End of Silence, man, it was like some real cool bluesy Sabbathy jams. Really good stuff. I like Rollins band a lot. And that album that you have there, that's a really good album. The production's great, super rocking. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's like not what you would expect from Rollins band, from the former lead singer of Black Flag, but yeah, it's good stuff. It's like, and he also does, in addition to Are You Ready, he does a cover version of Rocker too, which is pretty good.
Yeah, he did. I've got a bootleg. Well, it's a bootleg, but he actually sold them at his shows. And there was a live show from Australia, and they actually do Are You Ready, into Rocker, into Bad Reputation. So he does a little medley of Thin Lizzy. So it's pretty kick ass.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, Butch, you have any honorables for you?
Yeah, I got a couple real quick. That we talked about thrash before, and like for whatever reason, it just took me a while to get with the vocals, and to me, I loved Metallica, but to me, bands like Sepultura and Slayer were too like extreme. Like I liked Anthrax, I liked Death Angel. Like I could get with the vocals more. I could buy Overkill. Like Slayer took me a while. I like some of the riffs, but I was like not. I had friends that started out at Metallica with me, and then they heard Slayer, and that's all all they talked about. So, we went and saw Slayer at the Stabler Arena on the South of Heaven tour. It was them with Motorhead and Overkill opening for them, and Slayer just like blew me away. The whole presentation, like, it's one thing to listen to them, it's another
Yeah.
thing to see them when they're like tight as hell live, and then just their whole presentation, like the stage show with the all the backdrops behind them, you know, like the evil churches, and they use really dark color lights, like the dark reds and the greens and the freaking dry ice and just everything all together. It was just like, it was one of the most intense things I had ever seen to that point. So after that, it was like, you know, then it was like, oh, this is what's, you know, I could get it. I, you know, understood more like what it is that people were digging about them. And, you know, from then on, it was like, sometimes after that, they were, you know, it's cool. I mean, they were,
And you carved Slayer into your arm, and
Your arm,
yeah, but that's what cut through for me with them. That's the main one. We already talked about King's X. That's it, really.
Cool. Darren, honorable mentions.
Nah, just those two. Usually when I go to a show, I try to get familiar with the opening band, or I'm already familiar with the opening band. I had to kind of think a little bit about who my two picks were going to be. But Death Angel definitely popped out for me. And then after I started thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I hated Obituary before I saw him live, and then I loved him. So that's a real moment there for me. But otherwise, nah, no.
Yeah, this was tough for me because I'm envious of you guys. Where I grew up, there was no the closest for me to drive to Philadelphia, for my dad to take me to Philadelphia, it would have been 2.5 hours. I was 2.5 hours from New York. There was just nothing where I lived. So I just didn't go to concerts when I was, younger in my early teen years. But I almost put this one, it sits outside of the metal world, but I did not, I wouldn't say I hated this band, but I did not like this band until my son started getting into them, and he wanted to go see them in concert. And my son, he's really into like the 90s stuff like Nirvana, and he's also really into Green Day. And I never liked the Green Day, but he wanted to go see them live. And I was kind of like, he was too young to go on his own. So I was like, okay, I'll go with you. And I had a
Support for the
friend who's a
team.
metalhead who loves American Idiot. And he was always like, oh, American Idiot's this great album. I was like, I'm not listening to that. I'm not, no, forget about it. And I saw them live and I was just floored. I was like, wow, this is like, these songs are super catchy. I think they played all of the American Idiot album, and it was just great. And I've just really liked them. So I love American Idiot. They just put out an album like a few months ago that my son got on vinyl, and I was just borrowing the record from him. How strange is that? Can I borrow your Green Day record, to listen to it? So them, and this one, although I didn't see it live, it was a live performance. And this is kind of like Cinderella. I mentioned Winger. This was like the early when VH1, when Eddie Trunk was on VH1 in like the early 2000s, and he was just like a VJ on there, and he would have people come in and play in the studio. And I saw Kip Winger doing Miles Away just with a 12-string guitar. And I didn't see it from the beginning, so I didn't know who it was. And I was like, whoa, man, this guy's got a killer voice. He was playing all this like really cool stuff. I was like, man, this is a great song. Like, who is this? And I remember I was listening, okay, Miles Away. What is this? Miles. I remembered some of the lyrics, and I went and like typed it into Google or something. And I was like, whoa, this is Winger? That's Kip Winger. I was like, man, this guy sounds amazing. And that was kind of like when he started doing that solo acoustic thing. And then I saw him live doing that. He was on the boat when did the Monsters of Rock thing. And he's just great, man. He has this killer voice. He's a super interesting guitar. He's not really playing leads or anything, but he's playing all this like jazzy chords and all this like finger picked stuff and everything, and singing these great vocals. So yeah, those were my two honorable mentions. So All right. Well,
Winger was like, well, the whole Winger band was supposed to be kind of a super group of sorts. We had Rod Morgenstein from Dixie Dregs, but Kip Winger, I first saw him when we were talking about Alice Cooper earlier. I saw the Nightmare Returns tour in 1987. He was the bass player, and different. They gave him a nickname. It was like Deacon. It wasn't Deacon Dark, but it was something like that. But the band that Alice Cooper had was pretty great. Like this
Mary.
guitar player was like the muscle dude, Kane Roberts, but he was good, man. He looked ridiculous. He was like made up like Rambo, but man, he was spreading. And then Ken Mary on drums. Ken Mary's awesome drummer, awesome. And he played really well with the Alice Cooper band. But the three musicians in that band, man, they were really, really tight. And they just went from like some of the new. That was the tour for Constrictor. And so they played the new songs. They played a lot of old Alice Cooper band songs, and man, it was just like flawless. It sounded great. And Kip Winger, bass, he had like instead of Hofner bass, was that Paul McCartney like violin looking bass. But man, he was going to town on it. I mean, they were phenomenal musicians. So when the Winger thing came out, and I knew that Kip Winger, okay, that's the guy who was in Alice Cooper's band. I'm like, wow, he was a really great bass player. Then I knew that Rod Morgenstein was from the Dixie Dregs, and I'm like, wow, okay, this is going to be a band that's going to be like more along the lines of like a Kansas or something. And I was really surprised when I heard the music from that was
She's only 17.
Of that. I'm like, oh, this sucks. I mean, what are they doing? Why are they playing this kind of music? They should be doing something like like Kansas or something like a more prog
fusion, jazz.
And they could. It's capable. Yeah, exactly. But I guess I don't know, man. They just wanted to like go with the times and try to make a buck.
I saw them. I don't know if it was a reunion or if they were just whatever it was. It was probably like in the mid 2000s or something. And when they played the song 17, when they got to the chorus, whatever year it was from the year that song had come out, however old that girl would have been then. So it was like, she's only 52.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Hey, I wanted to point out they just were one of the headlining acts at Prog Power in Atlanta this year was Winger, because they did the whole pull album, and supposedly I've never listened to that, but they say that's a very proggy album.
And talk about killer
I haven't
vocals.
heard it, but I believe it.
You mentioned King's X and the 3-part harmonies. When I saw Winger, I was like, oh my God, these guys were up there like, they would hit these harmonies and it sounded like Queen or something. It was just like three guys like just absolutely nailing these harmonies. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, they play really well live. We saw them at the Airport Music Hall in Allentown on the tour for that first record. They were headlining in the clubs at the time, and they were great. Cool too. Like Reb Beach and Rod Morgenstein, we waited outside after, and those two dudes came out and were like talking to us and had signed stuff for us. And then Kip comes walking out. He just goes, "What's up?" and walks right on the bus. Like not another look, not a stop, and nothing. They were good live though.
That's funny. All right. Well, there you go. There's our picks for bands that maybe we weren't into them. Maybe they, we were indifferent towards them. We saw them live and they won us over. So let us know what you think of our picks. Let us know some of the bands that did this for you. You saw them live and they turned you into a fan. Let us know in the comments down below, and we'll see you at the next Dudes Talking Metal.